Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's ACM Tech Talk. This webcast is part of ACM's commitment to lifelong learning and professional development, serving a global community of computing professionals and students. I'd like to start by pointing out that live English captioning is available for this talk through a widget that you should see on your screen. I'm Vicki Hansen. I'm a past president of ACM and currently serving as ACM's Chief Executive Officer. Before that, I was a research staff member and manager at IBM's T.J. Watson Research Center in New York, founding their accessibility research group in 2000. I also was a professor at the University of Dundee in Scotland and a distinguished professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology in the US. My research focus is on accessibility of technology for people with disabilities, the aging population, and related research ethics. For more information on my background, see the bio widget on your screen. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with ACM or what it has to offer, here's some more information. ACM has educational and professional development resources that bolster skills and enhance career opportunities. Our members can stay competitive in the constantly changing world of computing with a range of ACM learning resources at learning.acm.org. You can see some of the highlights here on your screen. ACM recognizes the role of computing in driving the innovations that sustain competitiveness in a global environment. ACM provides, for example, access to the ACM Digital Library, which has the world's most comprehensive database of computing literature. It supports global conferences that draw top experts on a broad spectrum of computing topics. It provides support for education and research, including curriculum development and teacher training. Is a collection of principles and guidelines designed to help computing professionals make ethically responsible decisions for professional practice. Before we get started, I'd like to mention just a few housekeeping items shown on the slide in front of you. And again, for anyone who may have missed this at the very beginning, I'd just like to point out that live English captioning is available for this talk through a widget that you should see on your screen. If you're experiencing problems with slides or audio, refresh your browser or close and relaunch the presentation. If you have questions for the speaker during the talk, please type them into the Q&A box at any time and then click the submit button. I'll organize the questions as Eve is talking, and we'll try to get in as many of your questions as possible. I also need to let you know that this session is being recorded and it will be archived. So you'll receive an automatic email notification when this recording becomes available. Check learning.acm.org for updates on this and other upcoming webcasts. At the end of the presentation today, you'll see a survey open on your screen. And I encourage you to take a minute to fill it out, as this will really help us improve our tech talks. You can also open the link to the survey at any time from the resources window. And just to wind this up, you can use the widgets on the bottom panel to share the presentation link with your friends, as well as tweet comments and questions using the hashtag ACMLearning. We also have a community discourse page to continue the discussion after the webcast. Okay, so today's presentation is entitled Horizontal Leadership, Practical Lessons for Driving Company-Wide Strategy and Action. And this talk will be given by Eve Andersson. This is the second time I've had the pleasure of moderating one of Eve's tech talks, and I'm really looking forward to this next hour with her. Eve Andersson is the Senior Director for Accessibility at Google and a member of the ACM Practitioner Board. Before joining Google, Eve was Senior Vice President of Academics at Neumont University. She also co-founded ArsDigita Corporation, an open source software company that was acquired by Red Hat. And also she was a visiting professor of computer science at the Universidad Galileo in Guatemala City. He has co-authored 2 books. The first Software Engineering for Internet Applications, and the second, Early Adopter VoiceXML. She holds engineering degrees from Caltech and the University of California at Berkeley, and an MBA in finance from Wharton. So Eve, it's over to you now.
Thank you so much for the intro, Vicki. It is an honor to be doing this with you again. The talk that we did a few years ago, it was about accessibility, how to build software that works for people with disabilities. And this time around, it's completely different. This is really the synthesis of 8 years of learning how to drive a program across an entire company. And not just my own learnings, but also things I've learned from collaborating with others who lead similar initiatives. So I hope that it is useful for all of you. This video, the format of the talk is a 23-minute video, so the talk itself is pre-recorded, but Vicki and I are staying around for Q&A afterwards. Questions are my favorite part, so please do put in your questions, and I will see you on the other side. I'd like to talk with you today about horizontal leadership. When I say horizontal leadership, I'm not talking about traditional management or leading one team. I'm talking about driving change across an organization that is bigger and more complex than one team, where you might not have the ability to set the mandate and you might not control the resources. So what are some examples of horizontal initiatives? There could be one around security. Maybe you want your company to have common security infrastructure and guardrails for all products. Maybe one around internationalization. You want to bring your company's products to more global markets in a concerted way. Or the area that I work on, which is accessibility. And my goal is to make sure that all of the hundreds of products that my company creates work well for people with disabilities, and at the same time, drive innovation and development of new products. Maybe you already work on a horizontal initiative, or maybe there's some progress or change that you want to drive across your company. My goal is to help take this vision that you have and give some practical lessons that you can use to make it go even faster. First, let's talk organizational structure a little bit. Regardless of how reporting lines are drawn, regardless of how many people work on your initiative, it could be 1,000 people, or maybe it's early stage and it's just you and your idea. It's still useful to think about organization in terms of a hub and spoke model, where there are centralized hub functions and then decentralized spoke functions. Hub functions are usually things that are holistic. For example, setting goals for what you want your initiative to achieve at a company-wide level. And also things where you can scale by building once and deploying everywhere. Spoke functions are things that each individual product team or other team should do. So today, I'm going to take you through various things that could be considered hub functions. But I should say at the outset that there isn't always a right answer for what should be hub versus spoke. You, as the leader of your initiative, are going to need to make these decisions based on trade-offs. What's the resourcing situation that you're in? Where is standardization important? Who is best poised to innovate? Is it the hub, which might have a greater concentration of subject matter expertise? Or is it the spokes, where people know their own customers the best? What are some of these candidate hub functions to consider? Here's a brief overview, and then I'll go into more detail on each of these things. Number one is understand. Really develop a comprehensive understanding of the problem space, the current state of your company, user needs, and so on. Second is set objectives. Decide what you believe your company needs to do. The third is to influence. Help ensure that other organizations within your company prioritize your initiative. The next is streamline. By that I mean make it as easy as possible, as automatic as possible for people to act upon whatever it is you want them to do. Next is measure. Define and track the most important metrics. And last is communicate, which is tell the story in a unified way, whether it's internally and or externally. And I should point out that all of these functions, they're iterative and interdependent. Over time, you might have profound learnings from the user research that you've done. And that could change the objectives that you set. It could change how you decide to measure things. Your team might build new technology that streamlines the work, and then that in turn makes it easier to influence others in your organization to work towards your initiative. So let's dive into each of these 6 hub functions. There are a few things that anybody working on a horizontal initiative needs to get a good understanding of. One is the business case for what you want to do. And maybe if you're here, you've already developed that because maybe you had to pitch your initiative to even get it funded in the company. But even if you were handed this project, even if somebody said to you, here are our objectives, now go execute on it, it's still really valuable to develop this business case because it's going to help you have an easier time setting the objectives and with influence. And when I say business case, here are some of the things that could be included in it. Revenue, of course, cost savings, maybe improving quality of your products, improving the trust that users have of your brand and your company and your products. It could be improving your company's reputation or improving employee satisfaction. Ideally, the business case will be tailored to your company. It will be tailored to the mission, the values, the culture. It could even be different across different orgs within your company. For example, in the case of accessibility, the case for making our products work well for people with disabilities, it's different if the products are enterprise products versus consumer products. And so I have to adapt what I say in different organizations. Another thing that you'll want to have a good understanding of is the current state of things, whether it's your own company, how is your own company doing in this space? What about the competitors? How are they doing? Are they doing anything innovative or really valuable that your company should consider? You might need to do research to kick off your initiative, but also on an ongoing basis. In accessibility, user research is really core to what we do. We do research both in foundational areas to understand user needs, but also on an ongoing basis to understand how people are reacting to and what they like about the products that we develop. And it's the kind of thing where the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know. And so I expect that we will have a robust research program for many years to come. Moving on to setting objectives, it can be helpful to think in terms of both long-term and short-term goals. For the longer-term goals, paint a picture of what you want to achieve. Think about your vision without concerning yourself with timelines or resourcing. But for shorter-term goals, you'll probably have to be tactical and prioritize ruthlessly. Sometimes this can be harder than defining the long-term vision. For example, let's say your initiative involves making product changes. You'll probably have to define some internal standards that products will need to comply with. When developing these standards, you're going to have to balance between what is the outcome, the ideal outcome you want to achieve, versus what can the company reasonably accomplish based on resources, expertise, tools, and so on. And these things evolve. They all evolve over time. And so your standards will probably evolve over time too. If you work in a big organization, you might also have to prioritize which spokes you focus your own time and energy on. For example, let's say your initiative is about environmental sustainability. So you might set company-wide standards, but then where you focus your attention is on operations that have the biggest carbon footprint. When I started working on accessibility a long time ago, we had a very small team. And so we had to prioritize the engagements that we had with product teams around the company. And so we focused on products that had the most usage, but also products that we knew were really critical to our user base. There's a good chance you're going to have to use influence to pull off whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. You might need many people to do many things, and especially if they don't report to you, you'll have to get their buy-in. This is called influencing without authority, and there's so much material on this subject, whole books on this subject. Even if you're able to get a top-down mandate for your initiative, I'd argue that you're still going to have to use some influencing skills. And when I say top-down mandate, what I mean is, for example, if the CEO of your company declares that everybody must abide by what it is that you define. Even then, unless you're going to be satisfied with some people doing the bare minimum, you will have to use influence to make sure that they care. Here's a few tactical tips that I think help with influence without authority. One is to use the business case that you created, but adapt it to the person or the organization that you're talking with and see if you can align with their initiatives. The next tip is that for some people, probably for most people, not all decision-making is based on hard facts. Share the human impact of what it is that you're proposing. And my third tip is to tap into whatever prioritization mechanisms your company has. Those might be quarterly objectives and key results, or the performance review system that has expectations for people in different job functions, or some companies even have executive compensation criteria. See if you can align your initiative with those mechanisms that already exist, and or maybe influence the owners of some of these things to see how your initiative can be incorporated into them. Of course, the easier that you make it for people to do things, the more likely they are to do it and to do it right. Let's talk education. You want people to know what they have to do as well as how to do it. And this education could take any kind of form. It could be internal classes or documentation that people read or on-demand videos. Think about the different job functions in your company, what they need to know. Do the engineers have to have some new capability? Think about when people need to learn this information. Is it when they first join the company? Should it be part of the onboarding program for new employees? Is it when people are planning for and spinning up a new project or a new product? Is it on demand later? It may be people, when they encounter a certain obstacle, then they need one little piece of information right in that moment. A couple of words of advice from having gone through this. One is try to make the education as self-service as possible so that people can just get it when they need it, stay in the flow, and not lose momentum. And another piece of advice is to not only include technical information, but also include motivational information in the training. Because if people care about what they're learning about, they're so much more likely to absorb it and retain it. Tooling can also be a really important part of your strategy. Think about what tools you can build to make it as easy as possible for people to accomplish things, whether it's standalone tools or preferably integration into existing tools that are already part of people's workflows in the company. Are the engineers in your company using a development environment that you can integrate automated checks into? Are the user experience designers in your company using design tools that could be modified to produce designs that comply with your standards by default? Also, think about processes that exist in your company and where you might be able to integrate. Are there regular design reviews? Are there regular launch reviews? Can your initiative become part of those? Also, think about services that your hub can provide to make things easier for the rest of the company. Let's go back to that earlier example about internationalization, where you want to bring your company's products to more global markets. One thing that you can provide is centralized translation services. And maybe you still need to ask product teams to contribute their own budget, and that's fine. But what you can do is make it a lot easier for them by having these relationships with the translators and by maintaining the tools that translators use. Another example, which probably applies to almost any kind of initiative you can think of, which is how to give help to people who are working on it internally who are not part of the hub. This could take the form of office hours where people can get their questions answered by subject matter experts, or maybe some kind of consulting program where people go in and are temporarily embedded within product teams. I'll give you one more example, and this example goes back to one of the things I said at the beginning, which is that there's not always a right answer for what should be a hub versus spoke function. And this is an example from accessibility. So in accessibility, there are two kinds of tests that really have to be done whenever a new product is developed. Or whenever any product is even modified, which is automated testing and manual testing. And so we had to decide, the manual testing, it requires a lot of people to do it. So we had to decide, should we have all the people in the central hub who do the testing for the rest of the company, or should each product team be responsible for its own testing? And there are pros and cons for each of these. The pros for doing it in the hub is that we have a higher concentration of subject matter expertise, and we can make sure that consistent standards are applied across the whole company. And the pro for doing it in the product teams themselves is that these product teams know their products really well. They know what they're supposed to do. And also, if they're doing their own testing, they have more skin in the game, meaning they're using their own resources to do testing. And so that incentivizes them to get the accessibility right upstream so they don't have to keep testing over and over and over. So what we decided on in the end was a hybrid model where most product teams do their own testing, but we also provide testing as a service for product teams that don't have enough capacity. And we also do spot checking on the testing that other teams have done. Of course, you'll have to measure and track progress across all of the goals that you've set, but what other things should you measure? You might want to track indicators of future progress or program health, and you can call these maturity metrics. One example might be what percentage of people in the company or within any given organization have gone through the educational materials that you've created. Also, if your initiative has externally facing impact, try to track that real-world impact, whether it be some combination of quantitative data like changing consumer sentiment over time, or qualitative data like real user stories. This can help you know if the goals that you set are the right goals. And it could also help provide evidence on whether your company should continue funding your initiative. The last hub function I want to talk about is communication. And a lot of what I'm about to say only applies if this is an externally facing initiative. But even if it's internally facing, you'll have to think about internal comms and how you share the story with your company's employees. So as a hub, you have a unique ability to look across your company at everything happening in your area and tell the story in a unified way. And of course, communications are often bidirectional, with learning and collaboration from customers and partners. Think about what are the channels that your company has to reach customers. Does it do direct sales? Does it work through resellers who resell your products and services? Are there customer support channels? Think about how your initiative can fit into all of these. In the case of accessibility, we decided to set up a customer support program which was separate from the main customer support program that already existed. In our program, users with disabilities can get help via phone, email, chat, sign language, and even Be My Eyes, which is a really popular app in the blind community. And we decided to make this separate from other support channels because the knowledge that support agents have to have around assistive technologies is so specialized. But you might decide that for your initiative, integrated support makes the most sense. Okay, those are the hub functions, but now let's talk about the people who will work on your initiative, whether they're part of the hub or embedded within the spokes. Think about the qualities of the people that you want to work on your initiative. For accessibility, the perspectives that employees with disabilities bring are so important, not just in the hub, but embedded throughout the entire company. My team and I, we're not only product focused. We work with our colleagues in human resources, in facilities, and many other parts of the company to help make sure that our hiring process and our work environment are inclusive. I said at the beginning that this is not a talk about management or not about traditional management, but there is one important aspect of managing a team that works on horizontal initiatives. And this is that often the work that they do is loosely coupled with the outcomes that they achieve in the company. And what I mean by that is that they might have to try a whole bunch of different things until they figure out what sticks and what really moves things and drives change in the company. And that can be exhausting, and it can take an emotional toll. So one thing that helps is to think of projects that you try as experiments. And even if they didn't have the outcome that you were hoping for, you will have learned something. And with this mindset, you and your team will have the stamina that it takes to drive a multi-year initiative. And when you pause and look back, you'll see how much you've been able to accomplish. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So now it's time to do some questions. Thank you very much, Eve. We have some questions waiting for you here. Let me get to the first one that was asked. There we go. This question, I am more on the spoke side of your model and would like to transform processes for other spokes and also the hub. How do you convince the hub that you get the mandate for the change, but not become part of the hub?
I really like this question because I don't think that hub and spoke really are structural things necessarily. I think it's more conceptual, that there are centralized things that can apply to the whole company, and then there are things that are more particular for different teams. And so I always encourage people throughout the company to participate in the what I call hub functions. For example, we have our education program, and I think we have, let's say, dozens of volunteers from around the company who are not part of my team, but who are working on it. So it shouldn't be based on reporting lines. And often the people who work on the individual products or the spoke teams have a lot of knowledge because of the organization that they're in. And so there's a lot of value to contributing it back. So your question then was really, how do you convince the hub that you have the mandate for this change without becoming part of the hub? And I think it all goes back to what I said about influencing. And really, I was talking about when I was talking about influencing without authority earlier, I was mainly talking about the hub influencing the spokes, but it can go both ways. And I think that if you have good ideas, use those same techniques. Think about what's important to the hub. What are their goals? What are they trying to achieve? How can your ideas help them achieve what they're trying to achieve? And see how your ideas can fit into that. And I think it's really just a matter of influence.
Okay, thank you. So somewhat related, I think. One, have you any experience in using these techniques to transform the organization itself? What do you think of starting change by staying under the radar for as long as possible?
Yeah, I guess these are a very interesting question, and it's two questions. So one is about changing the organization itself. And yes, absolutely. As I mentioned towards the end of the talk, one of our goals is to make sure that Google is a really inclusive place for employees with disabilities. And so that is about organizational change. And it's about working with and influencing a lot of different groups within the company to make sure that they're not just considering the needs, but including people in the process of developing these programs in the different parts of the company. So yeah, that's a big part of what I do. Then the second part of the question was, what do you think about staying under the radar for as long as possible? I think a lot of this is under the radar in a way, because it's, you're influencing people. You're not necessarily getting up on a stage and saying, this is the change that I want. It's really working with the different teams. And so I think it can be as under the radar as you want it to be. I think in my case, it was really important for our employees to know that I was on their side and that my team and I cared and wanted to do this work. But there could be other instances where you are influencing behind the scenes and where staying under the radar makes a lot of sense.
There's a couple of questions here, Eve, about influence without authority, which was something I was wondering about also. So one question is, can you talk a bit more about influence without authority? I'm curious how your strategy may change with company internal influence versus external facing influence. Can external stakeholders be incorporated into the hub and spoke model?
Yeah. I love it. Yes, I think that external partners are really helpful, can be really helpful for influencing internal parties. For example, we have in accessibility, we have partnerships with a lot of different organizations, different advocacy organizations for different disabilities and so many others. And I feel like in a way, they're my partners in influencing internally. And of course, the internal folks are my partners in helping to meet the needs for these external organizations. So that's definitely one part. I think for influencing without authority, you want to gather whatever evidence that you can that supports your cause. You really want to understand whether it's the information that supports your cause, but then also how that fits into whomever's organization that you're trying to influence, and really find that match. Really try to make it a win-win situation for everybody. There's so much more. I saw that somebody else had asked about resources. There's a book on it, a really famous book. This famous book is called Influence Without Authority. And I think it's the only one with that title, so it should be easy to find. But the authors are, I'm just double checking, Alan Cohen and David Bradford. So that can also help give some really specific techniques. But in my experience, I think the most important thing is really about getting to know the people and what they care about, and then having an open conversation with people. I think sometimes I see people go in with these pre-made presentations that are really fancy, but then they don't have a conversation and they just kind of say everything they know and hope for a yes at the end. But what really works is having a two-way conversation and developing this rapport and this understanding, and then seeing how things can fit together. And it's not always a one-step process. Often it's a multi-step process with a lot of different conversations, and maybe conversations with allies within the company who also work with that person, and so on. So it can be involved, and it can take a lot of time to do, but in the end, that's what gets results. So it's worth putting the energy into it.
Yeah, so that was interesting. You ended with basically the next question I was going to ask. Someone specifically asked about what is the role of personal relationships. I don't know if you have anything more to say about that, but someone else detected that personal relationships may be critical here.
It's huge. It's huge. Yeah, you want to be the type of person who gives as much as you ask for. I think that really helps a lot. And you want to be seen as somebody who's competent and isn't going to squander whatever resources somebody gives you. And the way to do that is by knowing people, knowing what they care about, being generous with your time, getting out there, which, a little bit harder in a pandemic, but whatever you could do to be part of things. And I'm part of different horizontal initiatives at Google. I share what I know. I meet with people, them just to give, and then that pays dividends. You never know when, and you never know who, but eventually it does.
So there were a couple of questions related to how you start this up. They're phrased in different ways, but do you have any general comments you could make about starting up one of these hub and spoke scenarios?
Yeah. I think going back I think the first thing to do is to gain some knowledge, and not to gain a perfect understanding, because you don't want paralysis by analysis. But the first thing I would do when starting something like this is to just get the lay of the land. So going back to that understand slide that I had, just do some basic fact finding on what is the state of your company, what is the benefit of doing this program, what are others in the industry doing, and starting from there, then you can start to develop this picture of what needs to happen. Now, what you do next is really going to depend on resources at your disposal. It might just be you. And so either you make a pitch for resources if you think that that is going to be successful in your company, which it may or may not. It depends on the headcount situation. It depends on the budget situation. Or maybe you go and do things on your own, and you could even consider some of your work to be a prototype for what you want to eventually create. You might even just work with one spoke. Maybe you set up, okay, this is what I think we need to do, but let's just try it out on this very limited basis, because we don't have a lot of resources. We just have one person. So find some group that's willing to try it out. And of course, that means that you're going to have to figure out how to get buy-in from them. You'll have to figure out, why do they care? And it might be because their team, it's part of what their team is trying to accomplish, but it might just be that one person, maybe the leader, cares about something. They might, leaders are people, and people care about different things. And I know a lot of people who care about accessibility because of their own relationships that they have with people, or their own personal circumstances. And so it's not always that you have to have all of the perfect information to get people to be willing to try things. You might just be able to find someone. And then if it works for that one group, then you have this beautiful case study that you can use to try to expand your program to the rest of the company. And maybe this case study can even be used to help you get funding if getting funding was more difficult before. So that's how I'd get started.
Okay. And so the next stage, there's several questions about time, pointing out that people do have limited time, and where would you advise investing the most time? What are the most critical stages in this whole scheme?
Yep. I think we all feel resource constrained. And I think where, at least for accessibility, where there seems to be the biggest bang for the buck is in the streamline side of things. Creating tools, processes, etc., very, very clear guidelines to make it as easy as possible for people to act on whatever you want them to. Because, the easier you make it, the harder it is for people to say no to it. So I think that's where my team and I spend the bulk of our time. It's mainly pretty tactical things, so it's not as exciting to talk about in a presentation, but I feel like that's what moves the needle the most out of all of those things that I talked about.
This is interesting. At least I think it's interesting. Can you share a time when you had to downsize or rescope your goals to fit what is currently practical? In other words, how do you square a vision of accessibility to realities and stay motivated?
Oh, yes. I mean, it happens all the time. I know that when I started 8 years ago on this, I had lofty goals to require, I even have some old presentations with timelines in them where I thought, okay, by end of this year, we're going to make a requirement that all new launches be tested for accessibility in the whole company, which, is a huge company with so many different products. And then by the end of next year, all of our products are going to be accessible. And that, of course, was ambitious. And it didn't really play into the reality that different products are at different stages in terms of capabilities for accessibility. Also, I didn't realize how much buy-in I was going to have to get, that there's a lot of autonomy in the company. And by design, and I think it's wonderful. It means that the company is really able to innovate and move quickly, but that makes horizontal initiatives like mine a lot harder. And so that's when so I wasn't able to get my immediate wish. And so that's when I started to really prioritize which products were the most important. And there were some that were head and shoulders above the rest in terms of importance to our users. And so I made a list with my colleagues. We made a list. We did some initial testing ourselves to see how those products were doing. And we then just went through them one by one and worked with leaders in those organizations. And so we had to roll up our sleeves and do it incrementally instead of all in one go.
Yeah. Okay. We are beginning to run out of time here. So I'm just going to ask Eve one last question here. If that's okay. Looking back, Eve, what one thing would you do differently if you knew what you know today as it relates to influencing others?
That's so related to the last question, because I imagined that I could just get a mandate for what I wanted to achieve. I think I just didn't realize the intricacies and all of the different motivations that people have and the incentive structures that exist. And so I think I would have educated myself more on different parts of the tech organization, because the different, we call them product areas, which are groups of interrelated products. The cultures are so different, and what people care about are so different. And so I would have just tried to learn more, and I probably would have saved myself at least months of work in trying to do a one and done kind of thing. I think I would have learned that approach wasn't feasible in our company, at least. And of course, other companies are different. But I think that knowledge would have helped me direct my efforts a little bit more effectively.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. So, I'd like to thank Eve again for this great presentation. Got a lot of information from her about this, and a lot of answers. We didn't get to all of your questions. I'm sorry. I tried to group them together so that most of you had some part of your question answered. But I want to thank Eve for, again, doing the presentation, and I want to thank all of you as the audience members for participating and asking all those questions. This is just a reminder that this talk was recorded, and it will be available online in a few days at learning.acm.org. And you can find announcements on upcoming talks and other ACM activities at that same learning.acm.org, as well as at acm.org. And again, I encourage you to fill out your quick survey where you can suggest future topics or future speakers. And you should be seeing this survey on your screen. And on behalf of ACM, Eve Andersson, and myself, thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you in the future. This concludes the session.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicki, and thank you, audience, for your great questions.